Welcome to Press Coverage. I'm Theo Gremminger, and I'm joined by Curtis Patrick of RotoViz. This is really awesome to do this right before the season starts. Now we're on the right side of the page too, Curtis. So I was doing a little impersonation on that overlay. But Press Coverage is a show where I want to give you actionable advice. I want to help you find the edges to help you win your league. I think it's becoming more and more difficult to find those edges in kind of the information age here in fantasy football, where we're constantly bombarded by news from camp, by so much fantasy information. And my guest today is one of the sharp ones, Curtis Patrick, the Dynasty Commander from RotoViz. You know, he's very well known for his Dynasty takes, but Curtis is an excellent best ball player, always does well in the Pros versus Joes run by Fantasy Mojo. And Curtis gets into the high stakes streets. He plays in FFPC and does very, very well. So we're going to talk about mostly redraft today. I got a couple of Dynasty questions in. So for the Dynasty haters, you know, tough. It's late. It's redraft season, but we're going to get at least one question in with the Commander in the house. Curtis, how are you doing today, man?
I'm doing great. This is long overdue, Theo. I mean, we've been DMing each other for a couple years, even before we even knew each other very well, just kind of, I think, from being in drafts together, recognizing each other's names, hey, here's a picture of how this draft's going. What do you think about this guy? What's the best next pick for this team? So I'm really excited to get to know you a little bit better. I've been following your content as you've kind of bridged, this year from, being that, all-world type player to being more of a content producer, and have enjoyed watching you do that. But I'm putting our minds together here. Hopefully we get some great actionable advice for your audience. In terms of how I'm doing, I'm feeling grizzled, man. I'm like 500 drafts in this year. Like this week, this feels like the week where it all hit the fan, right? Yeah. Like everything's converging, 50 to 100 best ball drafts going at any time. You're trying to get in your high stakes redrafts. Dynasty waivers are running for the first time in a lot of different leagues, cut downs. It's like, it's taken from every angle, man. I haven't even shaved this week, but
I missed the Dynasty waiver wire run in the Black Crown League, which I joined this year, which you run with a lot of hitters. So I gotta get it together, man. I'm drafting every night, and this is press coverage. We've been trying to rock. This is in season we're going to be one show a week, but this week we got 4 in, and Curtis did the last one of the week, and we're going to get a lot of good stuff here. And this is like a RotoViz channel for me because I had Sean Siegel on First Class Fantasy yesterday, and now we have Curtis in the house. But it's great stuff. So one question I've asked Sean, and I've also asked pretty much every single guest on Press Coverage and First Class Fantasy for maybe the last 2 months, is you put a lot of time and effort into your drafts, but also your rankings and also like your thought process on players. If there was one player that you could know the final stats for of anyone in fantasy, who would it be? Is it a wide range of outcome guy? Is it a guy whose performance negatively or positively could affect his teammates? Which is that one guy maybe giving you pause that you would just love to know what's going on with?
There's so many viable answers, man. I'm gonna give you a couple, and we'll keep the take shorter, and you can dive in wherever you want to go. In the first round, maybe the most important player to know the stats of would be Cooper Kupp, because if he stays healthy, I mean, he could be the overall number 1 player and being drafted at a discount all year. But if he's ouchy and it doesn't work out with Stafford and the elbow falls apart, I mean, he could be the biggest waste of draft capital and totally sink teams. So, knowing Cooper Kupp's final stats would actually help sort out the first round a lot. Travis Kelce would be a 1B answer, because if he doesn't have, the mega season from last year and he's just like really good instead of like all-time good, that could be a problem. Going down a couple rounds further, it's hard not to say the name Breece Hall. Breece coming back from an injury in his own right, but there's so many reasons to be optimistic about the Jets scoring more touchdowns. He looked awesome last year. Dalvin could be just as much of a name signing as an actual functional signing for the team. And so if we knew what his role and his stats were going to be, he could be one of the biggest bargains of the final few weeks of draft season. And then you can go a little bit further down, but I'm not sure there's as many of those tilting type answers. If we go really late, and I know we're going to talk about this guy, later in the episode, potentially, you could even make an argument for somebody like Sam Howell.
That's who Sean picked yesterday.
Because that's interesting. I have not listened to your episode yet from yesterday, but the reason it's fun to answer with a quarterback here is because not only does it change the way you approach a quarterback position if you knew those stats, but there's all the derivative plays. Like if you knew Sam Howell's stats, you could make, some informed insights around what happened with Antonio Gibson and Brian Robinson, what happened with Jahan Dotson and Terry McLaurin. And so, the really sharp answer is to go with the quarterback there. Another fun one would just be Anthony Richardson.
That's one that a bunch of people have had. That's a great one.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I drafted him in a main event this morning. It's a slow one I'm doing with Biplap Mandel. And I'm in at cost. I'll put it like that. So great answers. We've heard Deshaun Watson from a lot of people. But those upper guys, that's one thing where we think we always know the first round, but at the end of the day, the first round does have landmines, and it does have a lot of guys who with a big wide range of outcomes. So I love the Cooper Kupp answer. That's one we're going to dive into a little bit later. First, we're going to hear from our sponsors, but when we come back, we're going to dive into a number of players and a number of positions. We're going to sneak in one dynasty question too.
Hey, people always ask me, what's the World Series of Fantasy? What's the Super Bowl of Fantasy? And it's easy. It's the FFPC. Their signature Players Championship has a $6 million prize pool, and their best ball leagues start in February. And they're the answer to so many questions. Hey, what's the best place to get a Dynasty Orphan? Well, you can adopt a Dynasty Orphan at the FFPC right now. There's more orphans at the FFPC than anywhere else on the internet. That's why we partner with them. So if you want to play fantasy football for low, medium, high stakes, you love Dynasty, you love best ball, you love seasonal leagues, all types of fantasy footballers need to go to the FFPC. And remember, use promo code Underworld. Promo code Underworld gets you $25 off your first team. Promo code Underworld, $25 off your first team, no matter what the format is, at the FFPC. Go get it.
Welcome back to Press Coverage. I'm Theo Gremminger with Curtis Patrick of RotoViz. And Curtis, you're the Dynasty Commander. So we have one Dynasty question, even though we're in redraft hell week. Right now, the big two wide receivers, and most likely the big two picks in any Dynasty startup draft that's not Superflex, are Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase. I know that we have them as 1-2. I know that RotoViz has them at 1-2, certainly at the wide receiver position. And most of the other sites you get your information from will have those two guys. It's low-hanging fruit. Who is your current wide receiver 3 in Dynasty? And if there is a player in Dynasty right now that could crack the big two and push one of those elite players down to number 3 when we talk a year from now, who could it be? And don't say Marvin Harrison Jr., because that's
that's a tempting answer, especially me being a Central Ohio boy, man. OHIO. I think at 3, there's really a tier where you can make some good arguments for people. Garrett Wilson is there, Jalen Waddle is there, JSN is there for a lot of people, and then I think you can include CeeDee Lamb and Amon-Ra St. Brown as well, and some may even include Chris Olave. And I think the likely answer would be from amongst that group, you wouldn't include Marvin Harrison there, probably. I think that the easy answer for who's the Dynasty wide receiver 2 next year is probably still just going to be Jamar Chase. Yeah. I don't know if the Bengals are going to be able to hold on to Higgins or not and keep everyone together. But can you imagine what Chase's numbers would look like if they can't hang on to Higgins? If they have to develop another level, alongside him. I think that's interesting, because then you really get into a situation where Chase it potentially could even overtake Jefferson, with his big play ability, his ability after the catch, and then just, could we drive 30 more targets his way? That's pretty exciting to think about. If you're going to not let me say the name Chase, now the easy answer is Wilson, but we also have to keep in mind, what's the Jets plan after Aaron Rodgers? So I think that's a little bit of a riskier answer, maybe than most are thinking. So I'll say Jalen Waddle, only because, and Sean has talked about this a lot on his podcast and written about it a couple times this summer. If it's not this year that Waddle overtakes Hill as the primary option in Miami, it probably will be in 2024, and Hill's age will start to drive down his dynasty value and the perception of what he can do in a given year. And people will start to take that projection forward. So I'll say it's a tie for me between Wilson and Waddle. And because you get Tua's age and the Mike McDaniel offense and, more of a wide open, I guess, approach to offense, I'll say Waddle over Wilson just to be different.
And I'll let you do one Marvin Harrison question because he's the truth. And it's one of the best wide receiver prospects we've ever seen. Where is Marvin Harrison going to be drafted in redraft next year? I'm going to say 3rd round in redraft. I'm going to say he steams all the way up there.
Yeah. That's interesting. If we talk early in the season, like never too early best ball for the FFPC or the big board on underdog, those types of things. I mean, I think you'll be able to get him in the 5th or 6th round, but if he hits a nice landing spot with any of these younger quarterbacks, I agree. I don't know if, round 3, I'll say top 45. I don't know if I'm going to say top 36.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting. That's definitely one that people are going to lose their minds for. And now we're going to pivot over to redraft before the people start getting annoyed. But one player that you've been really, really high on for the last few seasons as a guy that you should go out and get in Dynasty was Tony Pollard. And you were absolutely correct on that. That was one of your buys last offseason. I have him on plenty of Dynasty teams, but I've also been selecting him on a bunch of redraft teams. This is a guy who has the backfield all to himself. He is a dynamic talent. He's looking at a volume increase, and he's in the right offense for this. They've had plenty of running back success over the years, and his backups are Rico Dowdle and Deuce Vaughn. But Tony Pollard now costs you a mid-second round pick. Certain drafts he goes at the 1-2 turn. Where are you comfortable selecting Tony Pollard, and what are your expectations for him this season?
Yeah, I'm mixing him in that top 17 or so. I don't feel so passionate about his upside this year that I'm always taking him over Nick Chubb or always taking him over Saquon Barkley or even always taking him over Derrick Henry. But I mean, you can make a great argument for him, after Eckler's off the board. I have no problem with people taking him at RB3 over Bijan, and the guys that are, sometimes mixing it at the end of the first. The case against Pollard would just be if Dallas does really actually slow some things down, involve some other backs. If Brandon Cooks is, if he actually hasn't fallen off and the Cowboys can spread some of that receiving work out a little bit better than they have in the past, if Jake Ferguson's any good. I mean, I actually think the Dallas offense is kind of frustrating because they might actually be better in terms of the pieces that they have this year than they were last year, but they'll be run by worse offensive minds. So, I think that's the cause. That's why I'm not just all in on him as my RB3. I am above, I am overweight on Pollard, but probably into the level of, 12 or 13% exposure across about 500 best balls. I'm not crazy in on him to that 18 to 20% range for an early round guy.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think that it's the kind of the unknown that's really kind of attractive about his price as well, because I think that's a guy that if we were coaching Dallas, you would target him a ton in the passing game. But I think he's going to need that to really reach that truly elite, like top 2, top 3 running back season. And if you're drafting him in that range, you certainly want him in the mix for that. So definitely a really interesting one. Let's pivot back. Nick Chubb.
I'll say one more thing about say one more thing about Pollard. I mean, a couple sites have this functionality now. One thing we've got at RotoViz is our game splits app. I mean, we were the first people really doing that. Still one of our world famous tools. If you just go in there, you search Tony Pollard's career, just games that he has 12 rushing attempts. I mean, I think that's a really low bar. He should probably have 12 rushing attempts in every game this season, and if not every game, most games. He's got 16 such games in his 61 game career. At this point, he averages 18.6 PPR in games where he has 12 or more carries. I mean, that's 316 PPR points. So that's the type of upside you're talking about. There's not a lot of backs that have the 300 PPR upside. So, I just want to reiterate, there's definitely an upside case for Pollard. It does not require him having 20 carries a game to get there. He can get there different ways because he has been so efficient. And a lot of times people will push back on these hyper efficient guys truly blowing up because, sometimes volume is the enemy of efficiency, especially for guys that are those big play artists like this. But I think with Tony Pollard, he is the type of player where you can give him a little bit more without totally breaking him down, especially when they've added guys like Deuce Vaughn and some people that can get some of those gadgety plays potentially over the course of the season. So, yeah, I mean, sign me up for like 12 carries and 4 targets a game for Pollard. Sure. I mean, he could probably be the RB2 behind CMC in that scenario.
Yeah, no, I love that. And let's get your thoughts on Nick Chubb, because this is one that's a little bit polarizing in the sense that everybody loves him in the second round, but there are people that have him as RB1 overall in kind of the range of outcomes. One thing I'll push back on is we've seen the RB1 overall for like the last 10 years has averaged like 80 catches when you combine all these massive seasons. So we haven't seen the only running back that didn't break 50 catches in an RB1 overall season was Jonathan Taylor in 2021. And I think that's sort of the argument for Chubb this year, where it's let's get him to 40 catches and let's have him lead the NFL in touchdowns and also in rushing yards. Is that what you see for Nick Chubb? Like, how comfortable are you pushing him up the board?
I mean, I have pushed him up the board. I'm far higher on him than Sean and Blair. The three of us are doing our redraft rankings for FFPC. Let me pull up and see where I've actually got Chubb right now in my latest update. I took a look last night. I've got him at 15 overall, which is pretty close to ADP. Sean and Blair, I think rightfully so, question the receiving upside. Maybe you could even question, the upside of the Cleveland offense. Probably 90% of people are assuming that Deshaun Watson takes a step forward and Cleveland is, the best version of itself that it's been in the past couple of years. There's also a possibility that the 6 games we saw last year are just what he is now. As a Browns fan, I hope that's not the case.
It's tilting. It's tilting, man. It's really tilting.
It is, man, because if it goes wrong, it's just going to go so wrong. It's going to go so you have to leave a little bit of an opening to be wrong there. But I think Nick Chubb can have one of those Jonathan Taylor type seasons from a couple years ago. It's kind of weird to play the injury projection game, but if everyone stays healthy, I don't think he's got RB1 overall upside unless, it's via legendary, 22, 23 touchdown, type of season. But I do think he can hit, peak Derrick Henry type numbers that we've seen in the past couple of years. Like, if the Browns are really good in moving the ball and Stefanski, fights the temptation to totally open it up and stays a little bit more run heavy. I mean, sure, Chubb's definitely on the list every year that only consists of probably 2 or 3, running backs in any given season that have the capability of averaging 100 rushing yards per game and greater than 1 rushing touchdown per game. I mean, and that list this year is probably just Nick Chubb and Derrick Henry.
Yeah.
You look at Nick Chubb, despite not having a big receiving role, at any time in his career, he's got 5 straight years of positive fantasy points over expectation. That is really difficult to do when you're not involved in the passing game. And it's because he's such an efficient runner. He's one of the most efficient per touch, per pure rushers in the history of NFL football. And, he scores a lot of touchdowns, man. His fantasy points over expectation rank in the past 5 seasons has only ranked outside the top 9 one time. And he's been top 6 3 times, including the last 3 consecutive seasons. He was 3rd in fantasy points over expectation. Last year, he was 3rd in rushing yards, 5th in total touchdowns, 3rd in rushing attempts. I mean, if you just push that stuff all up a little bit with Kareem Hunt out of town, and I know Kareem Hunt was getting phased out a little bit last year, but he's out of town now. The gap between Nick Chubb and kind of busted Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb versus Jerome Ford is still a lot wider. So, Chubb stays healthy, absolute monster season. I'm talking like, beginning, those first 8 games from Derrick Henry in 2021 when he was setting it on fire and on pace for 2,000 rushing yards. Sure, we could see something like that from Nick Chubb. I still think it would be hard for him to usurp Eckler or McCaffrey if they still stay healthy, though.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting because we haven't seen a a running back in their 7th season finish as RB1 overall for so long. I think you have to go back to like LaDainian Tomlinson, but right now we're trying to search for it. And I think that Chubb definitely gives you like the structure. If you're going to start with like a hero RB approach, you can start with Nick Chubb and kind of build your team anyway. So he's definitely appealing there. Very predictable guy in that range of the draft. In that range of the draft, you have 2 former Ohio State Buckeyes that Player Profiler is extremely high on, as is RotoViz in the Dynasty streets and also the redraft streets. Where are you more comfortable? Are you more comfortable selecting Garrett Wilson around the 1-2 turn, or Chris Olave, let's call it the 2-3 turn in most home leagues? In FFPC right now, you got to probably use about the 210 on him.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a good question, man. Because I did kind of include them in the same big flat tier when we were answering the dynasty question. I'm a little bit more comfortable with Garrett Wilson only because I have a pretty good idea of how Aaron Rodgers is going to approach that offense. I mean, when he creates that chemistry with somebody that's the guy, I mean, they're really the guy. We've seen that with multiple receivers over the course of the career. I mean, highlight season has been in full effect all summer. And Garrett Wilson, I mean, he's really been making those types of plays, and he's been that guy since his age 18 season at Ohio State. He was popping that quickly. I'll never forget. It was early in the season. I think it was a September game. And he just makes this 180 one-handed catch with a tiptoe along the sideline down inside the opponent's 10. Like, who is this guy? Like, he's not even big. And I think a lot of people have probably seen that play, but in just watching it in the games, like one of the first times he got a lot of run, you just knew he was going to be there. And, with Olave, there's just a couple of additional questions. I think there's a reasonable teammate context question. If Michael Thomas is healthy, actually, which is a big if, he's probably a little bit more competition for targets than Allen Lazard would be to Garrett Wilson as the 2. If Jawan Johnson takes another step forward, he's probably a little bit more competition for targets than, any of the tight end options. Pick which one you want to argue for in New York. I know there's some varying opinions. Olave's probably got a little bit more there to deal with. I do like Olave getting more dome games. And in his defense, Derek Carr has also shown, a huge, favorability towards his best target. I mean, he propped Darren Waller towards his, all-time career seasons. There was really no fall off with Davante Adams switching over to Carr from Rodgers.
The Hunter Renfrow, the magical Hunter Renfrow wide receiver 1 season, the most random wide receiver 1 season maybe of all time.
Yeah. So I don't think it's fair to it's not like, Rodgers isn't playing at his MVP level anymore. So it's not really even a quarterback advantage. It's just, I think Garrett Wilson is a little bit better than Chris Olave. And I think he has less competition for those targets. And even assuming that both quarterbacks might favor their number 1 option and force the ball there a little bit, I just think Garrett Wilson has, less pressing up against him, maybe preventing him from being a wide receiver 1. Then there's also the context of what's going on in the draft in the second round there. So, it's opportunity cost, what's happening, who are you passing on, to take the player. Chris Olave, I don't know that there's a big difference between him, Waddle, Devonta Smith, T. Higgins. It's really flat through there. And I actually like, Keenan Allen, who's going at the end of the 3rd round. I think I like even better than Chris Olave for a couple of reasons this season. But that's also where those high-end quarterbacks go. And if you are willing to take a high-end quarterback and you want to pursue the Mahomes Kelsey stack, you want to pursue a Hurts Devonta Smith stack at that turn instead of a 1st and 2nd round stack, there's just some things you can do creatively at that point in the draft that kind of just always push me off of Olave. So I found it easier to pull the trigger on Wilson, particularly if Pollard is already off the board. I've taken Wilson in front of Barkley, in front of Henry. I haven't taken him in front of Pollard. And I would feel comfortable mixing him in there with, Adams and AJB.
I like that a lot. And that you talked about with the stack, the way that people are doing it now, Curtis, you're seeing the very common in FFPC main events is you take Kelsey at the 102, Devonta Smith at the 211, and then you allow the turn to decide which stack you have. But it's like the way to guarantee yourself a Hurts or or Mahomes stack. So guys, if you're trying that this weekend, we've seen it a bunch of times.
Yeah.
It's not that clever anymore, guys. And I have a question in the chat from Naughty. He's deciding between AJ Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Chris Olave at the 1-2 turn. I'm going to say for me on that, it's clearly AJ Brown and Amon-Ra St. Brown. I've taken both at the 1-2 turn, and we've actually seen Amon-Ra. Let's quickly get your thoughts on Amon-Ra before you answer that, Curtis, because Amon-Ra in the NFFC streets, they started their prime time, which is like their main event. And we've seen Amon-Ra St. Brown in that format, which that's a start 3 wide receiver with a flex, high stakes format. We've seen him go off the board at the 105, like 4 of these, let's call it 15 drafts. He's going at the 105. So the steam for ARSB is there right now. Where are you at on him? And then answer Nadi's question.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would have, well, I guess I don't want to answer it backwards. So my St. Brown take, agnostic of the other players, is, he's a dome player who's going to be the clear number 1 target getter on his offense. Now that we have clarity that we didn't have maybe back in May, June on Jameson Williams, we have that clarity now. And some of the Laporta fire that was starting to kick up and, right when minicamp started and stuff, that's died down a little bit. And, I don't know that anyone is really taking attention away from ARSB and that offense. And Goff, I mean, we're talking about quarterbacks that are good enough to support a wide receiver 1 without necessarily being excellent themselves. Goff is in that category, right? So, the dome games, especially late in the season, when you're thinking about high stakes and, transitioning from winning my league to winning, the tournament that occurs at the end, there's a lot of appeal in that potentially. Now, as far as how I would rate him against the other guys that were mentioned, I would personally have Amon-Ra St. Brown and Garrett Wilson right next to each other, and it would be a slight step below AJ Brown. And I put a tweet out earlier today, and it was intended for people that are drafting in home leagues, but I think it applies in really all things. Like, we really don't want to lose our draft by being unnecessarily aggressive in the first round. I mean, we want to have access to the players that they're going to write about as being the key to the 2023 season. Like, you want as many of those guys on your team as you can, but you're going to be able to get St. Brown in the second round often enough. Why would you take him over the wide receiver 1 who's tied to Jalen Hurts and the Eagles offense? I mean, I'll take the Eagles to score more touchdowns than the Lions this year. If we're betting on that. And, AJB has already shown the types of seasons that we would hope St. Brown would put together to justify that draft position. So I'm not going to draft that season when it hasn't occurred for St. Brown. There's also an argument to be made that AJB could take another step forward and that the Eagles could be even better and more dynamic this season. So, that's, I think the question was AJB, Amon-Ra, and Olave. I would order them just that way, Naughty. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll say the AJ Brown, it's funny how people are poking holes in AJ. A lot of people are kind of looking him at as a guy that he's maybe being drafted kind of towards his peak range outcomes. And I definitely push back on that one. I'm with you. Mm-hmm. Truly elite, talented player. And touchdowns are one of the biggest driver of fantasy success. Yeah. And AJ Brown, if we had to bet on a wide receiver that had the most multiple touchdown games, I think for me, it would be AJ Brown. I think he's just like you said, it's a second year in the offense, the comfort level. Nick Sirianni could put his foot on the gas a little bit more this year. And we also could see them in better game scripts, where last year they were kind of taking the air out of the football in the fourth quarter. With the defensive changes, they have a ton of talent, but, still you would expect to have a little bit more, returning to the mean. Let's keep this. Oh, so go ahead.
Let's just do one follow-up on that too. Like, even if AJ Brown is being drafted at the peak of his potential outcomes, that doesn't mean he's a worse pick than St. Brown there. Because again, we've actually seen AJ Brown post those numbers before. We're projecting those numbers onto St. Brown and hoping that he can achieve them. And if you can get St. Brown with some of that upside in the second round, that's far more valuable than passing on a player that's still in his wide receiver prime tied to an elite quarterback. It's not as if you're drafting, a couple of rounds later, select, round 4 or 5, taking, Amari Cooper instead of Christian Watson. I'd much rather dabble, with some projection in that range of the draft than at the top where we have just so much more information on people.
So I had your friend Scott Barrett split a main event with a B-Bag Batoba and I. And a B-Bag Batoba is one of the best high stakes players in the history of the game.
Talk you into that. That's a good deal for Scott.
That's a good deal for Scott. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun for sure. We ran pure at times. At times we tilted. It was fun. When you split three-handed high stakes, it's tough. Two-handed, you can like kind of talk it out. Three, it's always like 2 versus 1 arguments and stuff. But it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
If you want to watch it, it's on the channel, guys. But we took Davante Adams, but we wanted Garrett Wilson. Davante Adams in that middle of that second round it's kind of become a polarizing pick, Curtis, because a lot of people have a lot of concerns about the quarterback change, the offense, and then there's some people who look at him and say this is the greatest gift ever. Davante Adams had the most air yards of his career, the most targets. He finishes as wide receiver 3, and he averaged over 18 points per game last year. What are we doing? Sometimes I can get him at like 17 overall. Where are you at on Davante Adams at cost?
I mean, I'm just, I'll have exposure to him in the mid-second. I'm not going to draft him in the first. I feel the same way about Davante Adams that I feel about Derrick Henry. You can't get down on yourself for drafting, an all-decade type player in the second round that hasn't really shown any signs at all of dropping off. It's still going to be the feature part of the offense, even if the offense looks a little bit different. If we were taking these guys in the first round, I think, you could poke holes in it from a risk perspective. Taking these guys in the second could really be the ultimate gift for both of those players. Now, Garoppolo, health has always been the issue, but, he helped George Kittle to some pretty elite outcomes. And we saw, what he was able to develop in the battery with any number of wide receivers over the, course of the years that he was starting at least 10, plus games in San Francisco. If he can stay healthy, that would be helpful. But even in the games that Carr didn't play last year, Adams was fine. Like, he still blew up in those games. What was it? Jared Stidham, I think. I'm trying to remember.
Yeah. Jared Stidham, he had he's quarterback averse. He's an elite talent until age catches up with him. I think he's fine. Again, like, if I would rather have AJ Brown than him this year, but I'm going to take Davante Adams especially if you start with a running back in the first round and you need to make up for it. Like, he's right there.
I think the lowest you can defensively put Adams would be like after Olave. Like, I think you still got to keep him above Devontae Smith and T. Higgins and the guys that are like the number 2s in those offenses, even if they're elite offenses. I would rather have, all-decade type player Davante Adams and not bet against him. But I think it's okay to put him after Olave if you would rather roll the dice on the younger alpha and an offense that maybe has a little bit less of a quarterback question. So, what does that put Adams? Like, you put him below like 2.8, 2.9, at that point, you just got to pull the trigger even if you're out on him.
Yeah, he's got a certain level where you can't let him go past. Not everybody's a value-based drafter, but that value is staring at you. You don't have to get cute. You don't have to be too smart to win in this game. Just don't be dumb. And we get a lot of high-stakes people listening in to press coverage from FFPC, NFFC. So speaking more to a 20 roster league, but I think this also applies to home league players as well. Where is your comfort level in drafting players who are injured? And we'll take it from a couple levels here. So Terry McLaurin sounds like he'll be back, but it's turf toe. It's something annoying. Then you also have JSN, who's dealing with the wrist. Again, we don't know the extent. If I had to bet on it, I would say they potentially hold JSN out 4 or 5 weeks just to be safe. And then you have the tough one, Jerry Jeudy, hamstring. Could be 6 weeks, could be 8 weeks. Where's your comfort level with adding these sort of guys? You certainly get an ADP discount when a player is injured, but then you've got to hold them. You're using draft capital for them. Are you the type of player that goes in on these guys, or are you the type of player that say, I'm going to go elsewhere?
In redraft, if you're projected for multiple weeks missed in redraft, you're basically off my board. I'm just not, I holding on to them and just knowing how big and flat some of these tiers get, I think you can make an exception for depending on how truly elite the player is, but everyone that you mentioned, like these are like middling wide receiver 2 profiles if they hit their optimal this year. Like none of the guys you mentioned are top 6 wide receiver types. Why would I take that gamble on those players when there's so many other similar players that you can make reasonable upside cases for? Now, where I did make an exception is in best ball with Cooper Kupp when the injury occurs way earlier in the summer. Okay, I'll take a half a round discount on a guy that has plenty of time to heal, but I mean, the season's tomorrow, basically. Now, JSN is a little different than these soft tissue and lower body injuries. So if JSN is he's gonna reach a point where he's gonna probably get into those late single digit rounds, maybe even that 10th round, I think, as we get some clarity. And for a player like that, who I'm not depending on in my starting lineup from a redraft perspective, I'll eat a month, because when you draft these rookies, whether it's a running back or a receiver, you're really drafting them to be that second half of the season or even playoff hammer. That's the whole thesis in drafting these high-end rookies. It's not necessarily ever, except for the very rare player, that you're going to be plugging them in week 1 without having seen anything. But for a guy like Judy, as excited as I wanted to be on paper about the Broncos offense, soft tissue injury for a guy who's really only shown us a handful of games at the level that we thought he would be as a prospect coming out. I mean, hard pass on that. And then for McLaurin, Dotson's looked so good, and turf toe, it just seems like one of those. I don't have the data on this. I'm not one of the injury guys, but I've been playing fantasy for so long that turf toe is one of those things that's highly annoying. Now, I think I've seen it more often in running backs where it's annoyed me than wide receivers, but well, no, he's been the more expensive option in the offense. Why wouldn't I just go towards Dotson and get rid of that risk, even if Dotson raises a round or 2 on the news, you know?
Yeah, I'm completely with you on that one. F1 is a player we all truly believe in the talent, but he's also never had that smash season. So I'm not going to bet on him to have that complete smash season on a turf toe year when Jahan Dotson looks like a guy who could be a top 18 wide receiver with that sort of talent and a big play ability and route running ability. Daniel Barrio is asking your thoughts on Kupp. So I guess Daniel missed the beginning of the show. Curtis loves Cooper Kupp. But let's take this question a step further. Let's say you have one FFPC main event, Curtis, only, okay? Or one 350. One ticket. How high are you willing to take Cooper Kupp this year?
Man, I think if you only have one ticket, you can take him as high as, you can certainly take him as high as 2 overall.
So you can't over Tyreek Hill, you're taking him.
If you have one ticket, it might make more sense to take him there. Just have a more unique team. Because you're going to get a different pairing with Kupp in the second round than you typically would. Hill's also an awesome option to talk about. If you get one ticket, it probably makes more sense to draft one of those guys a little bit ahead of ADP than take the Kelsey, Chaser, or McCaffrey pick there where it would typically occur. But I'm definitely in on Kupp at cost. I'm in on Kupp above cost. And certainly when I got him at 109 in a Best Ball Mania today, Theo, which feels like a gift. Like, we already got the clarity on the injury now. And Cooper Kupp is so good. He's a wide receiver that lifts the whole offense. He doesn't just lift his quarterback. Like, the whole Rams offense is going to be predicated on Cooper Kupp's health. He opens it all up. They move him everywhere, and he's just so good. Last year, it's easy to forget because, unfortunately, week 10, he went down. But hey, he was number 1. He was wide receiver 1 in PPR per game last year. That happened last year. He was 2nd in expected points per game last year, 6th in fantasy efficiency, fantasy points over expectation per game last year, 5th in Whopper, 8th in Racer. It doesn't matter. Like, he was still his absolute normal self on that putrid excuse for a Rams offense last year. 31% team target share. If he's actually healthy, I wish I could donate my elbow to Matt Stafford and be sure that he was going to stay out there. But man, I think a lot of people, and again, I've mentioned Derrick Henry a couple of times already. I think a lot of people are swerving away from Kupp, maybe even swerving away from Henry a year too early. And I understand, hey, if you can make a case for a guy that's not that same age, take the younger guy because maybe they're less of a risk, or you don't want to, the problem with this is neither one of these players has shown any signs of decline. They absolutely look 100% of their elite selves. And who am I to question or project when that fall off is going to occur if the efficiency has still been there and the role in the offense definitely hasn't changed because of new entrants and threats to the market. So Cooper Kupp, man, I think there's an excellent chance that Cooper Kupp could be on the main event winning team this year. I mean, I hope he's on mine.
Yeah, no, there you go. I'm hoping I win the FFPC main event, but Curtis, I hope you finish second with your Cooper Kupp team.
There you go. And it'll be head-to-head Cup, baby. Let's go.
That's right. That's right. That'll be a good sweat. Shout out to Ray Chung. Shout out to Senior Football. The chat is lit. Make sure you hit the like button. Want to touch base on Keenan Allen. Jared Smola was on earlier this week. Jared is all over Keenan Allen. We had Mike Leone. He likes him. Billy Muzio loves him. I've been drafting him. Talk about how good a season you think Keenan Allen can have. And then let's take a step back because you have a 32-year-old in Keenan Allen in what should be a great offense. And he's being selected in the same range as Deebo Samuel, who was a top 3 finisher in 2021, younger player than him. And you also have him going around Christian Watson, which I love Christian Watson. I don't have him as high as Allen, but certain unknown upside drafters are definitely gonna possibly have him ahead. Why are you so bullish on Keenan Allen and this Chargers offense?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of reasons. I mean, even if we hadn't improved the offensive coordinator, and even if we hadn't added additional talent to the team, just again, look at Keenan Allen's numbers from last season. He was obviously, he had like the inverse of the Cooper Kupp season. If you could have meshed Cooper Kupp's first half with Keenan Allen's second half, because each of them only played half the season, I mean, you would have had the overall fantasy wide receiver 1. I mean, I'm pretty sure if you would have combined their stats, they would have outscored Justin Jefferson for sure. And so, once Keenan Allen was healthy, I mean, we had 7 weeks of that, and a lot of people didn't pay attention to it because he had such a big week in week 18 that didn't really matter for fantasy. Like, I understand that, but the game still happened, whatever. He was a wide receiver 1 in 3 of 7 weeks. And in one of those weeks where he wasn't a wide receiver 1, he still managed nearly 21 PPR. It was just a week where everyone ran hot in week 13, that big game that he had against Vegas. But if you look at his 8 games, where he was healthy, week 11 through week 18, he averaged 19 PPR per game, Theo. Like, what are we doing? Like, it's still Justin Herbert. I would still, if somebody was going to miss a game between him and Mike Williams, I still think I'd probably still bet it would be Mike Williams over Keenan Allen. But I mean, that's a little bit in jest. I just think, look, he was producing amongst the most efficient that he's ever been in his career at the back half of last year. He is the type of receiver who is getting targets closer to the line of scrimmage, moving all around the formation, has lived in the slot for a lot of his career. But I think, when you bring a guy in like Kellen Moore, you're going to see creativity for Keenan Allen, maybe that he's never seen in his career. And, with Quentin Johnston being, I guess a hybrid after the catch / deep threat guy, he doesn't seem as much of a contestant for Keenan Allen's looks as he would be for Mike Williams' looks, I guess, in my opinion. I think Keenan Allen is one of the 5 players who could lead the league in targets overall. I don't think I would bet on him to be the number 1, but if it wasn't going to be Justin Jefferson or Cooper Kupp having the most targets in the NFL, Keenan Allen is on the very short list of players, who would potentially, be at 150, 160 targets, in that conversation for the overall target getter. And if you get that type of target volume from Justin Herbert in an offense that's going to throw on early downs, and they're literally going to throw all game, because I mean, the Chargers are returning to their roots, man. I mean, the early 80s, Dan Fouts, like Air Coryell, like it's not exactly that offense, but they have a hit. I mean, this is LA, man. They don't need to run the damn ball and hire Mike McCarthy to lie about all the analytics research that he's done while he's been off the field for a year. Like, Kellen Moore's actually going to have the keys to this offense and open up Justin Herbert. So yeah, I'm really in on Allen just because I like the player and I like the situation. So super overweight on him. I've taken him as early as the 211 in Fantasy Pros championships when I didn't like how the board was sitting. I think there was an example where all 3 QB1s were sitting on the board. I had taken Kelsey in the first, and I personally, I mean, I'm leaning more towards Keenan Allen than Devonta Smith. That's kind of where I'm at. I certainly would have him in the same tier. And heads up, I'm taking Allen over Smith there. So I kind of did your idea you talked about 15, 20 minutes ago. And I went Kelsey, Allen, came back around and took Hurts there. So it wasn't a stack, but that's going to be a differentiated squad in the big tournament.
Yeah, and I've taken Hurts. I've done naked Hurts with no stack. You don't need to stack Jalen Hurts. A lot of people out there are trying to force these things. Let it go, guys. You don't need it. Just let him do his thing. Want to touch base on DJ Moore, and then we got to switch over to a couple other positions. We've seen a number of wide receivers smash on new teams recently. Last year, Christian Kirk, Tyreek Hill, AJ Brown. Years back, DeAndre Hopkins. Obviously, there's been a number of big successful moves. This year, the biggest offseason move was DJ Moore heading from Carolina over to Justin Fields and the Chicago Bears. This is a player that we all have really loved the talent, but he's been leaving us wanting a little bit more. He's sat there as like a wide receiver 2 for years. We always want a little more volume, a little more touchdowns. This feels like it could be the year, Curtis, where he really has a blow-up season. What are your thoughts on Moore?
I mean, I agree, but I actually haven't heard a lot of people say that, Theo. Everyone's been talking about the Bears aren't going to pass enough. It doesn't matter. He's going to need 35% target market share to break out. I mean, well, maybe he'll get it. So some things on Moore. I mean, he's objectively good at football. Excellent after the catch, always has been. One of the reasons that we liked him, despite not getting the awesome, as good of draft capital, maybe as easy, but possibly could have gotten coming out. But DJ Moore's he's one of the all-time RotoViz guys that everyone's always been in on. And I love Justin Fields, man. I know he's shown his ceiling mostly as a runner, but I think Justin Fields can be an above average passer in the NFL to go with his mobility. I don't think it doesn't have to always start with, well, Justin Fields can sure run the ball. I have a pretty large prop bet on Justin Fields to pass for 4,000 yards this year because there was great odds on it. And probably a better number is like 3,400, but it's possible. If you can really get things cooking, Chase Claypool gets a little bit more comfortable in that offense. Cole Kmet, they just extended him. I think this could be a sneaky offense. You and I were talking offline earlier this week about who are some of those sneaky offenses. The Bears could be one for sure. And it doesn't have to just be Justin Fields out there running for 1,000 yards. So, I don't know. If DJ Moore gets 7 targets a game, that's a pretty low bar. We're talking, 119 targets over the course of the season. That would be wide receiver 2 type level. In his career, and I'm including, a bunch of different quarterbacks, right? Some of these quality of targets could have been higher than a Justin Fields target thus far in his career. Some of these quality of targets could have been below that. But in his career, when he gets 7 or more targets in a game, DJ Moore averages 15 PPR per game. That's 255 PPR. That's AJ Brown numbers. Okay.
Yeah.
So that, and you're getting that in the 4th round. So yeah, I'm in on DJ Moore. I have a lot of DJ Moore.
Yeah, we took DJ Moore and then we took Justin Fields for the correlation with Habib and Scott and I the other night. And that was the first Justin Fields DJ Moore team I've been able to put together without besides underdog. So I'm excited about it. And I think one underrated aspect of it is, Justin Fields has possibly the fastest set of wide receivers in the league. All of those guys can fly. And they got Scott.
I didn't even say Mooney. I didn't even talk about Mooney. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's speed everywhere. And they made an emphasis on trying to get Yak this offseason, which is something they've had none of. And DJ Moore's a Yak guy. And I'm in on it. I think that they also have the fact that Justin Fields has the same offensive coordinator heading into that he had last year when the offense started getting better. So, and they've improved the offensive line. So I'm with you. General question for you in your redraft strategy. We talk about, the big 3 quarterbacks, which has really become a big 4 in the FFPC. And then for the NFFC, you're starting to see, Lamar Jackson is still affordable, but FFPC is right near Allen. So there's the big 4. And then you have the Justin Fields, Justin Herbert tier with Joe Burrow. And then we could talk about Trevor Lawrence a little later. But basically, what is your way of playing the quarterback position in redraft right now? Are you more apt to go early or wait a little bit or wait a lot?
in straight up redraft, we're not talking best ball.
Yep.
Managed league. I mean, I love the top 3 guys. I'll take the top 3 guys. I don't have a lot of Joe Burrow. Sorry, they're mowing right up against my window. It's awesome.
It's all good. It's sound effects, guys.
It's distracting me, but so listen, I like the elite guys. I don't have as much access to Joe Burrow, and I haven't really been avoiding him. Like, I think Joe Burrow, I mean, he could have a Patrick Mahomes type season. I have no reason to doubt that he could. I don't know if that's going to happen this season or not. I hope his calf's okay, but he's got, definitely better surrounding talent than Mahomes. And I think he's got enough arm talent to, he could be one of the guys that could throw 50 touchdowns if anyone's going to do it. Just hasn't worked out. I haven't had a lot of access to Chase, so I haven't, tried to force in Burrow in the 4th. And one thing I don't like about Burrow is, like, the case for him is that you've taken Higgins or Chase in front of him. Because if you take Burrow and you didn't get one of those guys, I mean, you're trying to jam in Tyler Boyd or Irv Smith, I guess. Yeah. Like, that doesn't feel like the type of correlation that I want. Now, in redraft leagues, I don't feel as convicted to necessarily have these stacks. Like, I know it's still very popular and it can simplify things for you in the playoffs, but it can also take it the opposite direction. I mean, all it takes is one bad weather game. You sink, 2 players in your lineup instead of 1, that type of thing. So I'm not arguing against Joe Burrow. It just hasn't worked out for me. I do have some Lamar Jackson with and without Mark Andrews. But I do like Herbert. I like Fields, and I like Lawrence. I mean, Lawrence is the cheapest of the guys that I've just mentioned, but I think that he could be easily the QB4 this year.
There's definitely some sharp money coming in on Lawrence. If you draft a lot like I do, or Ray Chung in the chat, you're starting to see a lot of people trying to build up those Jacksonville stacks. I know that's an offense you're bullish on, and I wish we could get to every question, but we're pressing up against time here, Curtis. I want to pivot over to tight end because 2 tight ends that you're on that I'm also on are Mark Andrews and Darren Waller. Mark Andrews is Mark Andrews, but Darren Waller has steamed up. He went past Dallas Goedert during the summer. Then he leaped past Kyle Pitts, leaped past George Kittle, and now he's leaping past TJ Hawkinson. Your thoughts on Darren Waller now that it cost you a 3rd-round pick in the FFPC main events? And I'll say to our NFFC listeners, I saw a really, really good NFFC drafter who's won multiple 6 figures take Darren Waller at the 3-4 turn in the NFFC.
Yeah, I mean, the tight end premium piece just makes it so interesting because that's another 2 rounds and you got to pay an underdog or in other formats. 3-4 in NFFC was interesting. I hadn't heard that yet. I'll
let
seen
you
him
know.
early...
I'm not going to reveal name, but I'll let you know who it was when in the DMs. You'll be shocked. You'll be shocked.
Okay. I've seen him he's gone at 3-1 in at least one FFPC draft that I've done. And when that occurred, it was over Hawkinson. So he's going as the tight end 3 in that scenario. I actually think it was stacked with Kelsey on that team, if I recall correctly.
Do you like the bully tight end, by the way, in FFPC? I feel like you're really trying to thread a needle.
I don't. Now, in best ball, there's plenty of data on FFPC that drafting 3, like in the first 10 rounds, especially if you do 2 in the first 5 or 6, can be really, really good for win rate. Connor O'Driscoll wrote a couple good articles for our site this summer on that. It's been, and I drafted some teams like that, but in managed, I just don't see it, man. I mean, if you were going to do, if you truly felt like there was no gap between Andrews and Kelsey and also believed that the lack of the gap wasn't because Kelsey was coming back to earth, but because Andrews was going to become Kelsey level, then and only then should you do that. I don't think it makes a lot of sense otherwise, but I mean, it's easy to make the case for Waller. Like, I mean, I'm not going to act like I'm some expert being on Waller. He's a clear number 1 in this offense in New York, much to the degree that he was, I guess it would have been in Oakland at the time before the team moved, when he was putting up, crazy PPR and tight end premium numbers. And those offenses, I mean, you're talking about, tight ends that can get 100+ targets are very rare in the NFL. And then when you add into the fact that he's playing for Brian Daboll, he's playing for Daniel Jones, who hasn't had those guys, really step forward at the wide receiver position and any iteration of that wide receiver room that they've had, it's certainly reasonable that he would lock onto this guy, and the offense really would just be run through Waller and Saquon Barkley. Let's run this offense up the middle between the hashes in multiple ways, and then maybe make life a little bit easier for Jones when he does go outside the hashes. So it's totally defensible to take Darren Waller in the early third if you believe those things. I think it is also defensible to take him over TJ Hawkinson, if only because if I'm looking at Waller, the thing that he has in common more with Andrews and Kelsey than he has with Hawkinson is he's his team's clear number one option. Hawkinson was very good last year, but you got Addison into that mix. I think there's some questions there. I think it's right and appropriate that Waller should go before Hawkinson in most drafts, wherever that puts his ADP.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that Waller is appropriately priced now. And I think if you're talking about, a lot of these 350s during the summer, especially FFPC, those teams that got Waller in the 6th round are looking extremely dangerous. Mark Andrews, we're all in on him as a top 2 tight end right now.
Jeez.
But where are you at on Mark Andrews where you would feel comfortable taking him? Because it seems like you're gonna have to possibly use the 1-2 turn pick in some of these main event drafts, because I've seen some smart people take Andrews there. I'm not quite there. Where are you at?
Yeah, I'm not quite there either, but I also can't really argue against it. I mean, if you go back to that 2021 season when Andrews was basically just, healthy and Lamar Jackson was basically just healthy, he was number 1 in like every tight end fantasy metric. I mean, first in targets, first in receptions, first in receiving yards, second in total touchdowns, first in air yards, first in Whopper, first in PPR, first in PPR per game, first in expected points per game, third in fantasy efficiency per game. So, I mean, this is definitely a player that, he's a league winner talent at tight end, and the offense is in a huge state of change, state of flux. They're going to open it up for Lamar. You could see the target volume and not just the touchdown upside for Mark Andrews this year as well. And it's not just the target volume from a standpoint that he out targets his teammates. It's not just a market share thing. It's just that the Ravens might throw the ball a lot more than they ever had. So, in 2021, he had a team target market share at 29%. Well, what if he has 29% on 100 more passing attempts this year? Than they saw that year. He could have a truly explosive year. Now, the reason that you would potentially see him go at the 1-2 turn, or maybe even start to go at that 10 or 11 at some point, is because people are playing the game of chicken. Like you really want Andrews there, and now if I don't take him at 10 or 11, and I'm fine with let's say I like Diggs, Lamb, St. Brown, and Wilson, and I'm drafting it at the 110. I feel pretty good about one of those guys getting back to me at the 203. So why don't I just take Andrews and then take the scraps at wide receiver from that tier? So you kind of get into, the 40 chess with the guys that you're drafting against, and you have to kind of read the room. So I'm not so sure that from that perspective, there's much of a difference between taking him at 110 and 203. But if you take him at 203, you better be right. You better be right about what he's going to do this year. That's all I'll say, because you to take him at 203, you're probably passing on some combination of either Saquon Barkley or Tony Pollard, and either Garrett Wilson or Davante Adams. So again, that's fine. Andrews has shown us that type of productivity in the past that would warrant that type of investment. But again, you better feel pretty good about it, because he hasn't produced at that level the number of times that we've seen AJ Brown or Davante Adams produce at those levels, respectively.
Yeah, we've definitely had misses the last 2 seasons for the tight end 2 in FFPC drafts. Last year, obviously, Manders didn't bring it. And then 2 seasons ago, Waller got steamed up to like 10, 11, and obviously had a disappointing season. Curtis, we've reached almost our closing point. I want to quickly get your opinion on Dalton Kincaid. This is a guy we're starting to see steam up. This is a guy that we have extremely high up in our Dynasty tight end rankings at Player Profiler. Where are you at on Dalton Kincaid right now from a redraft perspective?
I love Dalton Kincaid, man. I mean, it's like the news cycle / thoughts on him are kind of so weird to me, because like pre-draft is like, man, Dalton Kincaid, like look at this receiving profile. And then what if he lands? He's going to go in the late first. He's going to land with an awesome quarterback. And then he lands with the awesome quarterback. And then we also hear the buzz that, well, he's not going to be used like a traditional tight end. Okay, well, that's what we would want too. And then, he's a safety valve for Josh Allen throughout the summer, and he's dominating 7-on-7s, and he's looking great in 11-on-11s. It's like beyond Stephon Diggs, the pecking order is uncertain, and maybe they won't be able to run as big with it. Even though I like James Cook, maybe they won't run as much. Maybe they'll pass even more because they have this additional weapon that they haven't had before. It's like everything's gone right for him. Like, I'm actually surprised that he hasn't steamed up even more. And rookie tight ends are being drafted as aggressively as I can ever recall.
And for good reason, I think.
For good reason. There's available targets, and it was a really good tight end class. Like, that's something for a dynasty show another time. But it was a really good tight end class. But Kincaid hit the absolute nuts in terms of a situation to absolutely flourish. The Bills literally drafted him because they get murdered by Travis Kelce and they can't get through in the AFC. That's why they drafted him. Like, if the other team wants to take Diggs away, fine. We'll throw it on the seam to Dalton Kincaid over and over again. And when you get that right, then Josh Allen's just going to scramble on you. You're done. And like, that's why they drafted him. They drafted him for those December games. They drafted him for those playoff games. I have so much. I'm definitely, I'm at almost 20% in Best Ball Mania 4, and I'm at like 40% or something in DraftKings Best Ball. Like, I can't not draft him there. I don't know why. It's really overweight there. I've got a smattering of them in FFPC though. To be fair, I've only done about 10 of the best balls, maybe 5 or 6 of the super flexes, and then now I'm getting ready to hammer it and redraft. But you better believe I'll be aggressive on Kincaid as a win the flex type option and redraft. I don't think it's necessary to wait and make him your tight end 1, but if you wanted to do it and then you wanted to, cover him up really late in your redraft with, somebody like Hayden Hurst that's just going to walk into a bunch of targets and be, steady while you figure out what Kincaid's going to do, or if he turns out to be a whiff, you're not just on the waiver wire. You got to draft 2 tight ends if you draft him as your 1. But man, I don't know where you're at, Theo, but yeah,
I'm all in.
I'm in on Kincaid for sure. Couldn't be more in.
I think he's going to outscore Kyle Pitts rookie year 2 years ago. I think he's going to do it differently. But I think when we look at tight ends, we want guys with 90-plus targets. I think he's going to hit 90-plus targets. Yeah. And I don't think we should be treating him as a rookie tight end. He's really a big, oversized slot receiver. I actually think that Knox being healthy actually kind of insulates him because he's not going to have to block it all. And he's in the right offense. So we've seen, take a step back and look at all the success that rookie wide receivers have had the last few seasons in redraft. And I think that's Dalton Kincaid this year. I think he's going to put up a number, and then he's going to help teams win. So, Curtis, we've hit an hour.
I got to say one more thing, dude.
Yeah.
Matt Kelly should have told you shows with me are 3 hours.
I thought you had the hour.
No, it's fine. I want to conclude with one more thing on Kincaid. Maybe we'll do another draft and put a main event in together. But so on Kincaid, let's think about it this way. Zoom out to 50,000 foot. Okay. He could have similar stats to Jackson Smith Najigba, but then you get 50% more per reception in FFPC. Let's just think about it that way. It's not just the 90. You can think of him as a big slot if you want to, but he's a big slot that also gets a premium per catch. It's a no-break. In FFPC settings, he's a solid bet to be pass catcher number 1 in fantasy scoring amongst rookies. So that's the thesis on him. And that's why you want to smash him, in the 9th, 10th round where he's going.
Yeah, absolutely. We started seeing him going at the end of the 7th in a couple of these recent main events. So I think the market is catching up, but for good reason.
Yeah.
Curtis, this was awesome today. Really love chopping it up with you. Really have a lot of respect for what you and Sean and Colm and Dave Caban and all the good people at RotoViz do during the season. Let everybody know where they can find your work, when your pods are dropping, and what else you got cooking at RotoViz.
Sure. Thanks so much, Theo. It's a real honor to come on the show. You've been, like I said at the top, man, you've been a player I've admired for a long time, and it's awesome that you're out there giving advice now too. As far as my work and content, you can find my writing and rankings at rotoviz.com. In terms of in-season stuff that you're going to see from me this year, actually, Dave and I were planning this last night. I'm going to take over our game level similarity projections for this season. So you're going to get all of those upside and high floor plays from me at running back and wide receiver every week on Thursdays. That's going to help with your lineup setting. It's going to help you with some DFS. I'll probably do some dynasty content throughout the season as it makes sense. That'll probably waffle a little bit back and forth between some Devy, college stuff, dynasty value of next year's rookie picks type thing versus some dynasty trade targets and some dynasty trade diary stuff that I've done throughout the course of the year. You can listen to me on the flagship podcast on RotoViz Radio. It's just called the RotoViz Fantasy Football Podcast with Dave Caban and I. We just celebrated our 300th show together in the last
that's awesome, man. That's awesome.
2 years, which is crazy. Probably other than my wife, I talk to Dave more than anyone, which is pretty funny because we've never even met in real life. But that's what's cool about fantasy, man. We drop 2 shows a week during the off season, and during the season, we'll be dropping 3 shows per week. And one of those will actually be a focus on my weekly projections that will be found in written form also on the site. So I'll be everywhere in your ear trying to help you win those dynasty titles, those redraft titles, and Theo, trying to help you finish second place to me in the main event.
That's it, man. We'll chop it up. I'm happy to finish second in the main event. Well, I'm not happy. It'll be a sweat, but I think we'll take that outcome. This was awesome. Everybody, later tonight, you can watch Billy Muzio and I on a First Class Fantasy special draft our main event. That's going to be, they'll do a tweet about it. I believe it's going to be like 6:00 at night. Follow Curtis. Check out the great work at RotoViz. Stay here with press coverage. Stay here with First Class Fantasy. We got a bunch more great guests next week. No sleep till Vegas. Enjoy your weekend, guys.
Hey, I want to take a moment to thank you for tuning in. It's important to me that all of our media be free. This is only possible because of you allowing a true independent sports media enterprise to thrive unlike any other in the business. So please subscribe to the All In Package to continue to make all of this possible, to ensure that all of our stats, information, data, content is available to you, especially you, the people that get the site and get the show.